We now live in an age of immediacy. Whatever we need is a click away. Whatever stimulus, whatever we want to know, however we wish to back up opinion even, is right there at our fingertips. It requires no time at all, and yet it absorbs more time than ever before. Jean Twenge, the author of iGen, notes that the so-called iGen is the first generation to spend their entire adolescence in the age of the smartphone. More than previous generations, children born in the 90s and early 2000s are obsessed with safety, focused on tolerance, and have no patience for their idea of inequality. iGen is also growing up more slowly than previous generations. Tellingly, she argues that 18-year-olds look and act like 15-year-olds used to. Our culture's perception of virtue these days is of a label to be worn, a judgment to be cast, and often without any hope of redemption unless you conform. Whilst we have plenty of speedy virtue signalling and open acts of contrition to the culture, we practice precious little actual virtue. We have plenty of new rules, ever changing and ever more demanding, in order that we fit in morally. This is light years away from the age of Aristotle, whose idea it was that the way to come to moral probity is not through rules, but instead through the acquisition and practice of virtue. That you come to moral goodness through learned appreciation and habituation of key virtues. This is actually a slow process learned by practice and through watching and imitating great role models, just as an apprentice would watch a master of his trade. The greatest things in life, art, literature, music, are born of appreciation and patiently watching, listening, and learning a master at work. They take time to cultivate. They actually need some quiet. To learn an instrument requires not just a study of the rules of music, but listening to masters of that instrument, watching, practicing, cultivating until you are free to play that instrument as you would want. This is authentic freedom, not the modern understanding, which could be summed up as do whatever you like when you like. It is a practice which leads to human happiness, which was how Aristotle would have framed it. In the 13th century, Aristotelian philosophy was picked up when it was translated into Latin. It was developed extensively through Christian universities. The medieval world took the view that human beings were better understood in terms of their own inner natures. Aristotle came to be known as the philosopher, and discussions of all kinds were based on his body of work. A pivotal player here is St. Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas follows this idea of habituation as the pursuit of authentic freedom. He understood Aristotle as the expert on human nature. Within a framework of Christianity, he took as a basic structure happiness as a final human end, and the organisation within this of the virtues. Is human happiness flourishing today? The virtues as a path to human happiness, as the journey itself or towards an end, as either Aristotle or Aquinas would have understood them, appear lost to a whole generation. Righteousness for its own sake in politics and the culture, combined with the immediacy of social media, offer simple, quick fixes to global moral and ethical issues. We've lost the art of debate, the richness of discussion without fear of reprisal, the ability to quietly reflect, contemplate and consider. There are big issues on the table, but they are not up for discussion. We are not happier as a society because of isms, socialism, feminism and so on, which are creeds to divide us, not unite us. What are the virtues men like Aristotle and Aquinas reflected and deliberated so deeply on? Well, if you think of the virtuous life as a tree, then the four main virtues are like the trunks or branches of that tree. Known in Latin and the Catholic tradition as the cardinal virtues, from the Latin cardo, meaning hinge. They are the virtues upon which all good habits hinge. Prudence, temperance, justice and fortitude. Prudence orders our mind and intellect so that we can make right decisions. Justice perfects our will and relationships. Fortitude and temperance affect our emotions, either strengthening them in the face of difficulties or moderating them in the pursuit of pleasures. They are pivotal habits involved in right thinking, ordering of the passions and moral conduct, with the specific aim of perfecting human living and human happiness. A good way to understand what is meant by happiness here is actually to examine the opposite traits to the virtues, the vices. Take prudence, for example, which is arguably the virtue both Aristotle and Aquinas considered the big one. The vices, the opposites of the virtue of prudence, are acting hastily, being inconstant, acting without thinking, ignoring necessary information for making a sound judgment, lack of resolve, giving up or not following through on a decision, seeking advice only from those who agree with you or uniquely from those who are morally dubious. In short, being hasty or rash in words or actions, none of which ultimately leads to happiness. Prudence enables someone to reason and to act rightly. It shapes common sense. It perfects our intellect and natural ability to judge correctly. It helps you make good moral choices. It enables you to reason and to act rightly in any given situation, known as right reason in action. Each one of us was born with the capacity for virtue, but we need to shape our lives around the freedom and harmony of a virtuous life, and there are no shortcuts to this. What are the integral parts of a virtue you need to nourish in order to cultivate them fully? Let's go back to prudence. The key parts of a prudential act are good counsel, ask and listen, good judgment, think, and command, act. The good habits which hinge on this virtue are circumspection, docility, and foresight. Docility might strike people as an odd one, but consider it carefully. Docility is a willingness to be taught, to be flexible, to listen to others and be willing to follow some directions, and to be willing for others to correct you, to live well by observing and emulating other prudent and wise people. How often do we see children stubbornly refuse to learn, take some guidance, or even follow basic directions? And curiously, it applies just as well to our political and cultural discussions now, as indeed do the enormous tantrums which follow. Cancel culture, the dissolving of freedom of speech, and even demonstrations and riots are a product of our unwillingness to cultivate the virtue of prudence. Are the role models presented to us, and who constantly lecture and hector, ever truly wise and prudent? In the Catholic tradition, by God's grace, prudence gives light to our minds, restoring right reason in action. Fortitude and temperance calm the chaos and frustration of our emotions and desires. Justice restores the order of our relationships, rooted in the knowledge that each one of us is known and loved by God. We seek God to help us with the virtues, recognizing that they are not easy habits to master and enveloping them under specific Christian virtues of faith, hope, and charity. They are part of a parcel which includes the virtues, gifts, and beatitudes. Blessed be the merciful is a beatitude directly connected to prudence. Today, to be virtuous suffices if it is a tweet, a profile flag, a placard, or an Instagram image, and often an examination of conscience and act of contrition are demanded publicly and must conform without debate to the political moral levelling of our times. And there is certainly no mercy and no redemption. This is a personal journey into exploring the virtues, an opportunity to more fully understand the philosophy of Aristotle and Aquinas, hopefully with some great thinkers from within and outside the Christian faith, to personally explore the virtues considered key and work out how to apply them to everyday life, essentially how to put them front and centre in the daily pursuit of happiness. And you're welcome to join me.